The city liked to pretend it was listening. It hummed and flashed and blared 1,000 voices at once, swallowing one more without much effort. Emily Carter learned that on an ordinary Thursday in late April, the day she became a story that didn't belong to her anymore. It began before sunlight cracked the seam of her dorm room blinds. Her phone trembled across the faux wood discone, 2, 3 vibrations that didn't stop. She rolled over, her cheek lined with the imprint of her class notes, and squinted at the screen. 37 notifications. She assumed it was the senior project group chat, some last-minute panic about the deck they'd be pitching at noon. Instead, it was a cascade of tags and mentions and text messages from numbers she hadn't saved. Have you seen this? Is it true? Call me now. The link was to a thread on a campus forum, mirrored within minutes on Twitter, then Reddit. A freshly minted account with 3 followers posted a 600-word accusation. Emily Carter, the darling of the communications school, the scholarship kid on glossy brochures, had stolen the central concept of her capstone project from a classmate and presented it as her own. Screenshots of slides, a side-by-side of phrases, a blurred photo of her in a classroom, crown of her head bent close to her laptop like a grainy still from a crime drama. Her throat went dry. She sat up, blinked hard, read it twice. The words looked like her slides because they were her slides. The idea looked like their class discussion because it was the class discussion. 30 students had been in the same room, pulling at the same thread of an assignment. The accusation did not say that. It said she had lifted, taken, claimed. It said stolen. She texted Rachel, "What is happening?" 3 dots pulsed, disappeared, reappeared, then a reply. "I'm not comfortable talking right now. I need space." 2 hours later, the dean's assistant wrote that the meeting scheduled for Monday would be moved up to 11. A polite line about timeliness, an attached PDF titled Interim Academic Integrity Review. By 10, the campus newspaper had scraped the forum and run with it. By 11, she was sitting under buzzing lights in a windowless room trying to convince a half circle of faces that yes, she'd done the work, and no, she didn't understand why a classmate would say what she'd said. Someone cleared his throat. Someone else clicked a pen. Her advisor, who had once called her a quiet force, fixed his gaze on a legal pad and said they'd need to protect the institution and the process. Her phone buzzed on the table where she'd been asked to leave it face down. When they finally let her go, she read the new email subject line, regarding offer status. The PR firm in Midtown she had wanted since junior year, since she'd stood on the sidewalk across from their glass frontage and promised herself she'd get there was withdrawing their offer pending resolution. She found Rachel outside the building, hands wrapped around a paper cup as if the warmth might climb into her. The air smelled like damp concrete. "Did you start this?" Emily asked, voice soft because anything louder would break. Rachel flinched. Up close, she looked frayed at the edges, eyelashes clumped from crying or crying just enough. "I don't owe you an explanation," she said without looking up. "People are agreeing with me. That should tell you something." Agreeing with what? Emily could hear the tremor in herself. "With a post from an account made yesterday. It's not just one post." Rachel's grip whitened around the cup. "People saw. You just never saw them." It was a strange kind of math. The more repetitions, the more true. A retweet could be a vote. A screenshot could be a verdict. Emily stood there long enough to hear a siren coil down the block and to feel the ground turn less steady beneath her. Then she went back to her dorm and tried to draft a statement. Each sentence sounded guilty, like an apology for something half-remembered. She deleted everything. By sunset, the campus had developed a rhythm to the gossip. People watched her walk across the quad and turned shoulders to whisper behind palms. Classmates who had hugged her last week pivoted into doorways. The women in the office, who processed scholarship stipends, looked at her like the number in a column beside a ledger item. At 8, her mother called from 3 states away to ask in a voice tense with effort, "What did you do?" It was not the question, "Are you okay?" It was not what happened. It was the kind of question that told you what the world believed you had already done. "Nothing," she said, but the word didn't put anything back together. After the ninth unread message from a number she didn't recognize, "You're disgusting. A thief. You should be ashamed." She left the dorm with no plan except away. She followed the city like a tide pulls a swimmer. Broadway cracked open into Times Square, and the night became a screen. It was all there: long models 20 feet high, new stickers that never needed to inhale, a cartoon bear selling gummy vitamins. It tried to be proof that the city was too big for any one person to matter. A street preacher in a stiff suit declared through a microphone that judgment was coming. A man in a Sesame Street costume posed for photos and held out a matted paw for crumpled bills. Tourists tilted their chins up and drank the simulation of daylight. Somewhere behind the spectacle, a saxophonist played the same for bars, his case open to the rain. Emily found a spot at the edge where the red staircase was slick and cold and sat with her arms tangled tight. She watched strangers move like shoals. If she breathed deeply enough, she could count 8 different kinds of perfume and a thread of roasted nuts from the cart and the sour electricity of the subway below. The lights didn't blink. They commanded. "Look here. Buy this. Believe me." It was as though the city had perfected the art of never letting a single thought linger long enough to be examined. Her phone lit again. She turned it over and then turned it back face down. In other versions of this story, ones the newspapers would write if they wrote it, kindlethis might be the part where she met someone who handed her a blanket and a miracle. What she got was a man in a Marine Corps hat sitting 2 stairs down, sharing the space like they were 2 weather-swept statues. He wasn't tall. His knees knocked a little when he shifted, and his hands had that particular quality of men who'd use them to fix things that fought back. He didn't speak to her. He unzipped a thermos, poured liquid into a dented lid, and set it on the stair between them. "It's just coffee," he said after a while, not looking up. His voice had sand in it. "No strings?" She stared at the steam lifting in the neon light. "I don't have cash." He huffed something that might have been a laugh. "I didn't ask you for a tip." She took the cup because it was easier than letting it sit there. The heat moved into her fingers and then deeper, like the opposite of the emails had been doing all day. She swallowed. It wasn't good coffee. It was hot and bitter and alive. "Bad night?" he asked, still watching the blur of bodies pass. "Bad day," she said, and then a small, incredulous sound escaped her, because it was the first honest thing she'd managed. He balanced the thermos in one palm like it was a familiar weight. "New York's got teeth. Folks say it'll toughen you up, make you sharper. Sometimes it just bites." He said it like he knew a different layer of the city than the one on the billboards. She didn't answer. He didn't require it. After a long quiet that didn't feel like a demand, he said, "Name's Michael." "Emily," she said before thinking about whether she should protect even that. She decided it was too late and too early to reinvent herself. "Emily," he repeated softly, as if testing the shape of it. "You look like you need to remember that it's yours." Her throat tightened. "It doesn't feel like it is." He nodded, as if he'd already guessed. "Daughter of mine used to say that when the internet took her face and put a different story under it, like somebody else wearing your skin." What happened to her? The question rose without permission. She regretted it immediately. He didn't flinch. She forgot how to hear herself in the noise. He said, calm as the thermos in his hand, "Took me too long to learn. You have to stand real quiet to catch your own voice. Even longer to learn that quiet is not the same as disappearing." The saxophonist below pushed the melody up a half step, and the preacher switched from damnation to salvation, and the LED panels ran a blocked loop of a shoe flying across the sky faster than a person could ever move. Emily let the coffee sit on her tongue until she could taste something besides acid. She felt the day begin to uncurl inside her, not because anything had been fixed, but because she was no longer alone inside it. Her phone trembled again on the stair. She turned it over, thumbed the notifications away without reading. "It's everywhere," she said, not sure whether she meant the lights or the lies. "I thought if I worked hard enough and kept my head down, I'd be bulletproof." Michael tipped his hat back until the brim let the light stripe his forehead. "There's no such thing. Not here. Not anywhere." But there's armor you can build that doesn't make you heavy. It starts with telling your own story before someone else turns it into a headline. She wanted to laugh. What story? The one where she was a girl from a town most people flew over, who'd held tight to a scholarship like a rope and made a plan for a life that fit on a page. The one where she'd been the first to raise her hand, the last to leave the library, the person professors trusted to keep a team on track. The story she'd wanted was a set list: internship, job, rent in a place with a door that closed and a window that faced some kind of tree. What she had, tonight, was a blank. Or worse, a story she'd never agreed to tell. I don't know how to begin, she said. You're already in the middle, Michael said. Beginnings are just the parts we write later. They sat until her cup was empty and his thermos was capped, and the wind shifted enough to make her think about the walk back to campus. When she stood, the staircase threw a red glow up the seams of her jeans. She slid the cup back toward him. Thank you. He shrugged like it was nothing. Stay upright, he said. That's all the city ever asks. The screens kept shouting, and the preacher kept promising, and the city kept pretending it was listening. Emily cut through the moving picture like an ant across a painting and turned down a side street where the light receded and the noise turned to a manageable, solid hum. Her name still vibrated in other people's hands. Her offer was still gone. Her meeting with the dean was still scheduled for 9 the next morning, but as she walked, she pressed her fingertips to the pulse at her wrist like she was taking attendance. Present, present, present. Not a headline, not a case. A person walking under a sky that no billboard could really own. She didn't know yet that she would find a way to speak without their scripts. She didn't know yet that a website would emerge out of a sleepless night, that strangers would send their pain to her like letters addressed to a place no map could capture. All she knew was this: Times Square looked like daylight and wasn't. The city sounded like it cared and didn't. Her voice felt small and was not non-existent. She moved with the crowd until the crowd broke, and when she reached the turnstiles, she took a breath big enough to carry her underground. The dean's office smelled like old carpet and a lemon cleaner that couldn't quite cover the paper dust scent of files. Emily sat in a chair that sank to low and tried to keep her hands from shaking. Across the desk, a laminated card with the university's values: integrity, excellence, community caught the light. The dean used the words process, interim, and due diligence as if they were handrails. He did not use the word believe. He said they would be placing a temporary hold on her degree pending a full review. He said she should refrain from classes and campus activities for everyone's comfort. He said she could email questions to a general inbox and someone would triage them. The meeting took 23 minutes. When she stepped back into the hallway, her feet felt like they belonged to a taller person, like her center of gravity had been moved without her consent. In the time it took to descend the flights of stairs, her financial aid portal pinged her with a suspension notice until the matter is resolved. Her RA knocked on her door that afternoon with a brittle smile and a printout of the housing policy. It's not me, she said. Palms up. They're saying it's temporary. She stood there while Emily folded t-shirts on autopilot, while she slid framed photos into a shoebox. The RA did not ask if she needed help carrying the box down. Her parents could not send money and she would not ask them to. Her mother's last text was a paragraph that started with "We sacrificed so much" and ended with "Please tell me this will not be on the news." Her father's silence arrived like a sealed envelope. Brooklyn was a listing on a classified site with 3 photos of a coroner with a radiator, one of a window that faced a brick wall, one of a kitchen sink with a plant in a mug. Cozy studio, utilities included. No pets. The landlord met her on the stoop in slippers and explained the rules without pausing for air. No loud music after 9. Trash down the hall. Rent on the 1st. The bed was a futon. The window clanked when the heat came on. She placed her duffel on the floor and sat beside it and listened to the building's collective life pipes clearing throats, shoes above her pacing, the neighbor's television anchoring a laugh track. She needed a job by the weekend. The cafe on Smith Street hired her because she answered the phone the first time they called and because the manager liked that she'd worked fast food in high school. "We need Saturdays and Mondays," he said, sliding a W4 across the counter. "You good with oat milk, people?" She learned the machine's morning temper, the sound that meant the grinder was jammed, the way to knock the portafilter just so, without taking it personally. The milk jug took her 2 days to understand and 3 to not flinch when it hissed. Her fingers learned how to move without thinking. She liked the part where a cup went from empty to full and she could hand it to a person and say here. And it was indisputably something. It didn't make her invisible. The internet had already traveled the city. 2 weeks in, a woman in a camel coat and immaculate nails stared at Emily's name tag and tilted her head. "Didn't I read about you?" she asked like she was recalling a flavor. "You're that girl from..." She didn't finish. She smiled without warmth and said, "Almond latte, hot," as if kindness were a tip she didn't feel like leaving. That afternoon, a student with a tote bag full of library books lingered on the pickup side and murmured, "For what it's worth, I think they're being unfair." He left before she could answer. The manager, a lanky man in his 30s who collected enamel pins of obscure bands, pretended not to notice any of it. He counted the drawer and told her she was $5 over, and that was not the worst mistake to make. The rides to and from the cafe bracketed her days with their own logic. On the F, she learned where to stand so the doors would open in front of a stairwell. On the G, she learned how long she could stare at a rivet on the car wall without thinking at all, like a meditation app without the voice. The Atlantic Avenue Barclays Center Station was a mouth that swallowed and spat her into different neighborhoods. On her second week, she came up the stairs into late rain, a mezzo rain that soaked the top of her head and nowhere else. Michael sat on a milk crate under the lip of scaffolding, had broom shadowing his eyes, a duffel bag at his feet, a cardboard sign with nothing written on it. She hadn't noticed him there before, but then again, you didn't notice fixtures until something made you see them. She handed him a paper bag. "End of day," she said. "Bakery doesn't let us keep the pastries overnight." He peered in like it might be a trick. "What's in it?" "Croissant, 2 muffins, and a scone that we all agreed needs a lawyer," she said. It wasn't a good joke, but it made him smile. "You don't have to," he said. "I know," she said, which was true in a way that felt new. They developed a rhythm around absence. Some nights she took a different line and didn't see him at all. Some nights he said nothing, and she let the not talking be the talking. Sometimes he told stories that started note were specific about a guy in his unit who could sleep on a tank, about a laundromat in Queens that let him sit under the heater on snow days, about the way the city used a sound before everyone had headphones. He said his daughter's name on Siva's if he were placing it on the table very carefully and didn't want to startle it. "How old was she?" Emily asked, the way you ask someone who is holding an old photograph and has set it face down. 17, he said. She had a laugh that was 2 steps ahead of the joke. She hated tomatoes. He smiled into the rain. She thought I could fix anything. Emily waited. The entryway light blinked. The traffic light cycled through red to green and back as if the block were breathing. She got caught in a storm that didn't look like weather, he said eventually, and that was all. The storm followed Emily to her room. At night, she put her phone face down on the counter beside the sink because there was no table, because the counter was both kitchen and desk. She deleted apps and then reinstalled them to see what people were saying, and then deleted them again. She learned the habit of typing her name into a search bar and then staring at the results as if her face had been dieted into a smaller, meaner version by the words beneath it. Sometimes she clicked report. Most of the time she didn't bother. She kept notes in her phone that started with phrases like "things I know are true" and reasons not to panic when the espresso machine screams. She made a spreadsheet of potential roommates even though she wasn't moving. She tried to figure out what to do with a life that no longer had the milestones she had planned. Spot 1. Internship. Spot 2. Entry-level job. Spot 3. A plant, a couch, a person. The timeline had dissolved. She was left with mornings and evenings and the 14 awake hours in between to fill with something she could name, The school sent a letter with a stamp, old-fashioned and thick enough to feel like some kind of apology. It wasn't. The committee required more time, a tidy phrase, a thorough review. One professor wrote a private email that said he was rooting for her, personally, and that the process could be cumbersome. A classmate sent a DM with 3 words sorry about everything and no return address. Rachel's LinkedIn announced a new position, junior account executive. A smile and a blazer, and Emily learned she could feel 2 opposite things at once: grief for herself and a strange emptiness where anger should have been. Like the place where you expect a tooth and your tongue finds gum. At the cafe, she knocked a glass off the drying rack and watched it shatter into so many pieces that she couldn't decide where to start sweeping. Her vision tightened. She heard the manager's voice like it was underwater. "It's fine, Em, it's fine. Brooms to your left." She exhaled and felt the heat crawl down her neck and cool there, a line of sweat like the edge of a fever. On her way home that night, a teenage boy on the train filmed her without making it obvious. The front-facing camera passed off as a mirror. When she stepped onto the platform, he posted it with a caption that didn't use her name but did use her, like a word that didn't need context. She went up the stairs slowly, one hand on the rail, a line from the subway ad hovering in her head as if it were an instruction from a kinder world. If it's too much, look away. She didn't look away. She watched the city doing its late-night impression of a sea traffic flowing in channels, pedestrians like fish schooling when the crosswalk flashed the hand. She stood under the scaffolding where Michael had been and found it empty. The space he had occupied still held his shape somehow. She sat on the crate, felt its plastic give. The rain had stopped. Somewhere close, a kitchen threw plates into dishwater. She pulled a crumpled receipt from her apron and smoothed it over her knee. She uncapped a pen. She wrote "We need a place" and then crossed it out. She wrote "a place people can tell their own" and then drew a box around it. She thought of platforms and how they were designed for departure and arrival both. She thought of how the city had so many of them, each with a number and a direction, and how there was no platform that promised you could stand still. She wrote "platform" and then paused, the ink pulling a dot, and wrote 9 because it sounded like a place between 8 and 10 where you might be permitted to catch your breath. A siren threaded the block. A car door slammed. Somewhere, someone laughed, high and sudden. She put the receipt in her pocket and stood. It wasn't a plan. It was a noun she could carry. It was more than the list in her notes app and less than a blueprint. It was a word she had chosen, and tonight, that was a beginning. She taped the receipt to the wall with a strip of blue painter's tape she found in a kitchen drawer, the word "platform" underlined twice and the 9 written like a decision. The tape didn't hold well to paint that had seen too many winners. The corner curled as if the word were trying to get away. Emily pressed it flat with her thumb and opened her laptop. The apartment's single window reflected her face back at her until the screen warmed to life. On a new tab page, she typed a sentence and erased it, typed another and erased that too. Michael's voice from the staircase kept her playing. Tell your own story before someone else turns it into a headline. She had no appetite for confessions that could be scavenged and reassembled into fresh accusations. She wanted a place where the point wasn't spectacle. She registered a free blog on a platform that promised anonymity without much effort. For the username, she tried and discarded 5 ideas before settling on Between Stops. It felt exactly right, a location that was emotion. She disabled comments on the first draft and then enabled them with approval only, then made a separate email account because she couldn't bear to funnel whatever would come into the same inbox where her mother's silence lived. At 1:12 a.m., she wrote, I'm writing because I could not sleep in a room with a bed and a door and still felt like the whole world was in here with me. I'm writing under a name that is not mine because my own is being rehearsed by strangers. I don't want your pity or your pitchfork. I want to talk about what it feels like to be turned into a story that doesn't belong to you, and what is left afterward besides the noise. She wrote about the dean's office lemon cleaner, about the laminated values card that couldn't keep its shine. She described the way a cup of coffee handed to you at a counter could make a small dent in a day that had otherwise treated you like something to be scraped off. She named the particular loneliness of an accusation that kept multiplying itself, like seeing your own face in a funhouse mirror that had forgotten how to stop. She did not mention Rachel. She did not say the university's name. She wrote instead about the city's claim that if you kept moving forward, you were winning, and how no one told you what to do with the hours when moving was the same thing as drowning. By 2:03 a.m., the post was live under the title field notes from the after. She closed the laptop and stared at the ceiling, and then at the receipt, and then at nothing. Sometime after 3, she slept. In the morning, the blog showed 12 views. At lunch break at the cafe, there were 42, then 70. By late afternoon, a stranger had linked it in a small newsletter about digital detritus and our better angels, quoting a line she didn't remember writing. Being hated by 1,000 strangers is just being overheard too loudly. The words looked wiser than she felt. She flushed as if caught in a lie, and then laughed at herself, a sound that surprised her coworkers. New playlist, the manager asked as he knocked spent grounds from the portafilter. New essay, she said, and left it at that. The messages began as pinpricks. I don't know you, but I feel like I do. My son went through this last year when a clip of him was taken out of context. The school did nothing. He doesn't look anyone in the eye anymore. How do you get him to look up? I was a nurse at a hospital upstate. A patient's family posted my name and said I killed their father. He died because he was dying. The post got 10,000 shares. I moved to a different city. I thought the shame would stay behind and it didn't. I'm a sophomore and I said something stupid on a podcast that 5 people listened to, and then someone clipped it and now thousands of people have seen it, and I wake up every day feeling like I'm in a room where the floor is lava. I have no one I can tell that to except maybe you. She sat with her back against the futon frame and read them until her eyes blurred. Her first instinct was to respond with fixes, to make lists like bandages. Find a therapist. Take a break from your phone. Write down the things you can still trust. She stopped herself. There was an arrogance in prescribing from a life that wasn't yet standing up. She wrote back differently. I don't have answers. I have a place. Tell me more if you want. She added a page to the blog that said send me your story. No doxing. No revenge maps. First names or none. What did it feel like, and what do you need now? She hit publish and then immediately wondered if she had opened a floodgate she couldn't survive. At closing, she wiped the stainless steel counter until it gave her a true reflection. A guy with a black backpack and a laptop covered in stickers of programming languages she couldn't name, and a raccoon holding a wrench stayed later than most customers, writing in short bursts and then rubbing his eyes like they were a bug he couldn't squash. When the manager flipped the sign to closed and turned off one row of lights, the guy approached the counter. You got a spare USB-C charger back there? He asked, lifting his laptop by its edges. Mind staging a mutiny. Emily checked the drawer where orphan cords went to die and returned with one fat with tape. It gets hot, she said, but it works. Isn't that the motto? He smiled. Thanks. I'm Jason, by the way. Emily, she said, before she could decide how she felt about giving her real name to a stranger. It felt fine. It felt like a small, unbroken thing. He nodded at her screen, where the blog dashboard still lingered in a corner window. You a writer, trying to be a person who doesn't stop when someone else says she should, she said, and then immediately regretted the candor. Good line, he said, as if cataloging it for later. If you ever need to turn that site into something sturdier, I build things for the internet, not the dark web, the regular one. He held up a hand. Unsolicited offer. No pressure. I'll keep that in mind, she said, filing away his name with the same carefulness she used for passwords she didn't want to forget. He left the charger coiled on the counter and said, It's yours. That thing and more relationship wasn't healthy. On the train home, a woman in scrubs fell asleep, leaned forward, and woke with a start at J Street Metrod as if she dreamed herself off a cliff. A busker harmonized into a mic with a looping machine, building a choir out of himself, layering voice over voice until a hush gathered and people remembered to be generous. Emily held her phone in both hands like it might leap. She watched the little red notification circles bloom. She caught herself checking, and then chided herself, and then checked again. She saw Michael the next night under the scaffolding. He raised his thermos as a toast. "You look like you swallowed lightning," he said. "I posted something," she said. "People are writing back." He poured into the metal lid and set it between them like the first time. Ava used to keep a list when she was drowning. Things she still liked. Dogs in sweaters. The way steam looks coming out of manholes like the city's letting off pressure. The M train when it goes over the bridge and you actually see sky. When she couldn't find 5 things, she made herself look harder. Sometimes that was the only thing that kept her from thinking the storm was all there was. "What was yours?" Emily asked. She waited. He didn't answer right away, and she understood that it was not a simple question. Finally, he said, "Coffee that doesn't taste like regret, a good sock day. People who say thank you like it's the point, not the tax." She laughed and felt the sound lodge somewhere safe. He glanced at her phone. "Write like you're making a list for yourself," he said. "Then leave the door unlocked in case someone else needs to borrow it." She wrote every night that week. Dispatches. She started to call them, as if she were peeking out from a bunker and reporting back. One about the sensation of being erased while still occupying space. One about the dean's laminated words and what lived underneath them. One about the momentary grace of a stranger leaving a charger behind. She moderated comments with a steady hand, letting in the ones that brought sawdust and hammer, not gasoline and match. When a troll slipped through, she deleted without lingering, without composing a rebuttal that would only make a different fire brighter. The inbox filled like a tide. A high school teacher wrote about a student who had filmed her snapping after months of baiting and how the clip had landed on parents' phones, cut free of the months. A radio producer wrote about a joke she hadn't made being attributed to her and the way advertisers moved faster than truth. A forklift operator wrote about losing his job after a rumor and finding no one at the next place would look him in the face. A woman wrote about her sister who hadn't left her apartment in 6 months and the plants dying in the windows because even the light felt like judgment. Emily read until the words bled into one another. She folded her laptop closed and pressed her palm against the lid as if she could soothe it or seal it. On Sunday, the newsletter that had linked her first post ran a longer excerpt and a sentence that made her sit very still. "Between stops is building a room where shame does not echo." The phrase shook something loose. She sat at the window with a brick wall view and watched a pigeon figure out the geometry of landing on a narrow sill. She built a simple submission form. She wrote 3 rules in bold. No names you don't own. No addresses. No call to arms. Tell me what happened to you. Tell me what part of you is still happening. She agonized over whether the rules were cowardice or wisdom. She thought of Rachel's blazer smile and of her own nuclear option the audio file that could pull a pin on a life. She thought of Michael's lists and Ava's bridge sky. She chose rules. It felt like standing down from a fight she could win only by losing more. In the cafe on Monday, the morning rush yanked and jostled them all. Emily worked the register. The machine's beeps punctuating the chorus of milk steamers and orders shouted down the line. Jason reappeared at 11 with the exact kind of timing that makes you suspect a plan. He pointed at a corner table. "If you get 10 minutes, I'll show you the difference between a blog and a platform." She did not get 10 minutes, not then, but she found him later wiping code from a napkin with his thumb. He grinned. "I'm serious. You've got something. Let it be bigger than comment sections." She considered telling him her real name and then remembered she already had. Her life was full of haves and maybes and she was tired of pretending those were holes. "I'll email you," she said. That night, 2 new emails arrived. The first was from a school counselor in Ohio who wanted to share the site with students because it gives them a word that isn't punishment. The second was from an address with no name attached and a subject line that said, I have something you should hear. Her chest tightened. She hovered her cursor over the message and then moved it to the window and back. She didn't open it. Not yet. She stood and made tea and stood some more. Out on the fire escape. The air was soft for the first time in months, the city's vents sighing like a creature settling into a new season. She went back inside and wrote a sentence on a sticky note and pressed it next to the receipt on the wall. Write until the noise has to lower its voice to listen. The tape curled. She pressed it flat. The room hummed the refrigerator, the building, the block. Her inbox blinked. Somewhere above her, a neighbor sneezed, and someone said bless you like a benediction offered through floors. Between stops refreshed itself into morning. The map on the dashboard showed dots from places she had never been. She traced them with her finger to Poma, Tallahassee, Boise, as if connecting them would draw a shape meaningful enough to stand in. Her world had gotten smaller, her window still faced a wall. And also, there were people in rooms in other cities pinning receipts to their walls, making lists, choosing names. She closed her eyes and pictured a platform where no one had to board until they were ready, where you could stand between departures and feel, for a minute, like standing still counted. Jason picked a table near the window where the light was good enough to make coffee look like a promise. He had a notebook already open, a pen uncapped, the last half-inch of his latte going cold because talking about a thing mattered more to him than finishing it. You don't need a skyscraper, he said as Emily slid into the chair across from him. You need a room that won't collapse when people start showing up. I have a blog, she said, suddenly protective of the little she'd built. People are writing. I don't want to break that. We don't break it, he said. We give it a foundation. Blog stays the porch. We build the house behind it. He drew boxes sewn for a landing page, one for stories, one for a submission form, one labeled moderation with a cartoon lock. He talked about keeping it simple, a static front, a server that could handle spikes without turning into smoke, a database that didn't get confused if the people cried into it at once. He talked about costs like a person who had spent too much of his 20s shoveling money into other people's dreams. There's a way to make it feel quiet even when 1,000 people are in the room, he said. White space, readable type, no flashy anything. We add a quiet mode toggle that dims colors if a person's nervous system is already full. A panic button that turns the whole site into a weather app with one click. In case someone's boss walks by, one click back. We put a breathing strip at the pinhole. Exhale for the people who forget. You've done this before, she said, not sure whether she meant the building or the remembering. I've built a lot of places. Not many that deserve to exist. He capped his pen. This one does. She'd brought the receipt, with Platform 9 scrawled on it, folded in half like a talisman. She unfolded it and set it on the table. I keep thinking about train platforms, she said, how they hold you between leaving and arriving. How no one expects you to be anything but in transit, because the city gave you metaphors on your commute, he said, grinning. He typed on his laptop, checked a registrar. Platform9.org is taken by a British community theatre troupe. He made a face. We could hyphenate, platform9.org, or we keep between stops as the umbrella and call this section Platform 9. That way the porch and the house have the same address. I like that, she said, surprised by how right it sounded. Between stops is where we talk. Platform 9 is where we listen. He nodded. We put the rules at the door, clear, human, not written by a lawyer who thinks people are machines. No names you don't own. No addresses. No let's ruin this person. And no comments under stories, she said, feeling the decision harden inside her. People can respond, but not there. We'll make a separate room called letters, where the replies live like mail. No pylons. No swarms. Jason looked at her like she'd just squared an equation without showing the work. Letters, he said. That's good. Also, he added, fingers back on keys. We moderate before publishing. Not for truth, for safety. We're not the court. We're the bench outside the court where people breathe. They worked until the cafe flicked on the evening lights and the playlist slid from breakfast bops to songs with more bass. Emily wrote the About page while Jason shaped the bones. She used first-person singular, went soft into plural, and back again. We are writing from the middle. We are not therapists or judges. We are a light on in the hallway if you can't sleep. You can use your name or not. You can send 3 words or 3 pages. If you can't talk yet, we will keep a chair empty until you knock. When he moved her words into the frame he'd built, they dressed the room. He said a toggle that turned serif fonts to sans with a click, like changing shoes. He said a dark mode that was not black, but a soft slate that made white text look like chalk on a good day. He added a switch labeled quiet mode that softened contrast and slowed animations by a fraction, a mercy for jumpy nerves. What about a donate button? He asked, practical to the bone. Not yet, she said. I don't want anyone to think they have to pay to be heard. If this survives long enough to need money, we'll ask out loud and not apologize for it, but not day one. He shrugged. You're the editor. He made a face. Or whatever we call you that doesn't make you sound like a gatekeeper. I'm the person making sure the lights work, she said. You're the person who wired the panel. By 8, they had a thing you could visit. betweenstops.org/platform9. The landing page held a simple line, a place to tell what happened and what hurts now. Below it, 3 doors. Read, write, letters. The read room contained 6 stories from her inbox, published with first names or initials or nicknames chosen like armor. A woman wrote about a rumor at a hospital. A 16-year-old wrote about 2 seconds of a video played in slow motion forever. A father wrote, simply, I have not told anyone this, and then did. They flipped the switch. Jason posted the link in the same small newsletter. The editor wrote back in under 3 minutes with a thumbs-up emoji and then a paragraph that made Emily sit very still. The internet needs civic architecture. You just built a porch with lights that say we're up. I'll send people quietly. Quietly is the brand, Jason said, reading over her shoulder. If this hits Reddit, I'll babysit the server. It did hit Reddit, but not the loud parts at first. A thread in r True of Michus linked to a story titled The Day My Name became Google's favorite word, and then it was braided into smaller communities like Yarn, r Teachers, r Nursing, a private forum for women in tech that she didn't know how anyone had found. The traffic graph hiccuped and then sprinted. Jason Baby sat in real time, fingers flying, muttering to himself in a language that sounded like math. In the stories room, someone tried to post a list of names and addresses. The filter flagged it. Emily rejected it. 3 minutes later, an email arrived calling her a coward for refusing to hold monsters accountable. She typed 3 responses and deleted them all, then wrote the one that felt true. We are not the part of the process that breaks things. We are the part that keeps people from breaking. Michael found her 2 nights later with her laptop open on the bench below the station clock. The clock insisted it was 7. Her body said it was 12. You look like a person who forgot to eat dinner, he said, offering a paper bag that smelled like deli pickles and rye. I forgot to eat last night's dinner, she said, grateful enough to feel embarrassed. He watched her take a bite like he was making sure she wouldn't argue. Ava used to say people mistake walls for safety, he said. You can't see out, but the right kind of door keeps rain off and lets in neighbors. We built a screen door, Emily said, realizing it as she said it. We can see the world, and the world can see us, but there's a mesh that catches bugs. That there's a metaphor a person can live in, he said, pleased. He poured coffee into the thermos lid. How's the storm? Louder, she said. And also she closed her laptop and let her shoulders drop. People are finding each other. Someone wrote a letter to a stranger last night that said, I believe you, and I don't need a court transcript to know what your kitchen sounded like after. I've never seen the internet say that before. He nodded without surprise. Give a crowd a chance to be a choir, and sometimes it remembers how. When she got home, the anonymous email still sat unopened, a stone on her path. Subject line, I have something you should hear. No salutation. An attachment icon shaped like a paperclip halfway through a transformation into a warning. She moved the mouse over it and felt the nausea that came with knowing something could change everything and you would not get to choose the direction. Not tonight, she thought. She clicked away. She clicked back. She put the kettle on and paced a line in the 4 steps between the sink and the futon and back. She thought of Rachel's had turned just so outside the building. The sentence after the air quotes, "People are agreeing with me." She thought of how easily people became a weapon in a mouth. She opened the message. The body text was 3 words, "For your records." The attachment downloaded with a patience that mocked hers. She clicked and heard a room she knew. A campus hallway that hummed at a frequency only fluorescent bulbs learn, the sticky sound of a vending machine coughing up a drink. Then Rachel's voice, tense with the thrill of being overheard. "I mean, if you want the truth, I just nudged it." She had everything already, grades, professors, the narrative. "I was tired of being the supporting character in someone else's story. People think they want truth. What they want is to belong to a side." Silence bled into a muted laugh. Simeon else's. The audio ended there, a cliff she could fall from without moving. Emily sat very still. The first feeling was not triumph. It was an ache, deep and hollow, like discovering that a bruise runs farther under the skin than you thought. She could take this to the dean. She could send it to the PR firm that had rescinded the offer. She could post it and watch people who had been so certain now decide they had always believed her. She could pulverize the thing that had pulverized her. She closed the file. The receipt with Platform 9 on the wall waved in the draft from the radiator. The room sounded like a refrigerator, and the city, and the space between the two. She stood and pressed the tape flat again. "Foundation first," she said to the room. "Fire later, if at all." In the morning, Jason texted a screenshot of the traffic graph with the caption, "We didn't crash. People showed up and didn't break the furniture." A second later, a second text, "Proud of you, editor." She smiled despite herself and typed back, "It's just coffee." He sent a coffee emoji and then another line, "It's never just coffee." She brushed her teeth and watched herself in the mirror that blurred at the corners. She did not feel safe. She did not feel finished. She did feel like she had moved an inch in a direction she could name. She slid her phone into her pocket with the recording on it and the rules she'd written and the list she was making for herself. Dogs in sweaters. Steam in winter. The M train going over the water and finding daylight. She locked the door and went to work. The city pretended it was listening. She kept building a room that would make that pretense less necessary. The internet didn't arrive like a wave so much as a seep. First a trickle of new comments with a smell to them, then a thin stream of messages that all used the same phrases as if they were reading from a script. On Thursday morning, a campus gossip account posted a screenshot of Emily's between stops about page with a caption that managed to be both sneer and shrug. The thief rebrands as a therapist. Cute. By noon, a junior columnist at the student paper had published an op-ed titled "The Cottage Industry of Victimhood" that never named her, but left no one guessing. The piece quoted a source close to the original incident who suggested that certain people learned to make lemonade from their scandals. Rachel's LinkedIn headshot smiled beside a headline about a new campaign her firm was running for a wellness brand promising care without compromise. The algorithm served it too. Emily, while she was trying to avoid thinking at the register, she closed the tab and still saw the blazer and the careful hair on the inside of her eyelids. It felt like standing in front of a mirror that only reflected the things you didn't want to see. Jason noticed the tone shift first in the server logs. "We're getting brigaded," he said, rolling his chair back and forth like a metronome. "Patterns don't lie. Same IP blocks, different usernames, all arriving with torches that spell the same words wrong." He toggled the moderation queue to manual, set a trap for posts with addresses, added an autoresponder that said, "This is not the room for that." The traffic graph looked like a heartbeat having an argument with itself. Spikes when a story about a teacher or a nurse landed in the right forum. Dips when the trolls grew bored. Emily sat with her back against the fridge and watched the submissions come in like a list of witnesses waiting to be sworn. She let herself cry on for 15 minutes with the futon cushion pressed to her face, and then she stood and made eggs and ate them standing and answered emails with a steadier hand than she had thought she could borrow from herself. At the cafe, a pair of students in branded hoodies came in around 4 and ordered cold brew and stood too close to the counter to be an accident. "She's monetizing," one said, loud enough to carry. "This is what they do now. Oppression influencers." Emily tamped espresso and flicked the portafilter with a sharp wrist. The manager looked up like he might intervene, and then looked down because he had a line to move. The woman in the camel coat reappeared, almond latte, hot, and watched Emily pour the milk. "You're getting lots of attention," she said conversationally. "Must be exciting." She left a 50-cent tip and a perfume cloud. On the platform home, Emily stood where she had learned to stand and tried to make her body heavier than a common thread. Her phone vibrated. The dean's assistant had written, "The committee would welcome any additional documentation you feel is relevant." A tittier sentence there rarely was. The audio file sang to her from the pocket where it lived. She imagined dropping it into an email like a match in a dry field. She imagined a campus version of Justitia Retraction, a reinstated offer, a statement that did the thing statements never did and actually took responsibility. She imagined 1,000 tiny knives flipping direction and pointing at Rachel instead, and she felt, for a second, the thrill of it. Then she thought of the stories in her queue, the letters that arrived like folded hands, the rules she had written on the wall: foundation first, fire later, if at all. Michael found her under the scaffolding. "Storm different tonight?" he asked, reading her like a weather map. "Same storm," she said. "New wind. I could end this. Not all of it, but enough to make the next week quieter." He nodded as if considering a complicated knot. "Question ain't whether you can," he said. "It's whether that's the thing you want to be good at. What if it's the only language they understand?" She hated the whine in her own voice, the exhausted righteousness. What if teaching them to stop requires something sharp? "Sometimes sharp is a scalpel," he said. "Sometimes it's a shiv. You know the difference by what you're aiming to save." She laughed without humor. "I hate aphorisms." He tipped his hat back. "Then don't treat them like orders. Treat them like sandpaper. Rub until you feel the grain." She slept almost not at all and woke like a lamp turned on with a faulty switch. In the morning, her inbox held an invitation from a podcast she respected, the kind that asked better questions than "Are you mad?" They wanted to talk about between stops, about Platform 9, about how to build rooms on the internet that did not replicate the worst parts of a town square. She said yes and immediately wondered if that was the first mistake of a new genre. The student paper requested a response to the op-ed. She sat at the cafe after close with the smell of espresso in the grout and wrote and erased until she understood what she wasn't going to do. She wasn't going to litigate her case in 1,200 words on a site where the comments section would eat them for breakfast. She wrote 3 sentences instead. Calm as a museum placard. Between stops is not a defense. It is a place. The stories there are not weapons. They are witnesses. If you are looking for a fight, you will not find it here. Jason approved. The manager read it and said, "It sounds like you." She clicked send. Rachel emailed at 11:17 p.m. the subject line, "Clarify." The body, "I'm concerned you are using this situation to bolster your personal brand. It's irresponsible." She CC'd herself at her work address, like she wanted an adult in the room to witness her tone. Emily stared at the word brand until it emptied itself of meaning and then filled with something worse. She typed and erased twice and then wrote, "I'm trying to keep people from drowning." That's the brand. She did not send it. She closed the window and reopened it and wrote instead, "We should talk." No CC. She hit send before she could save herself from it. They met in the neutral zone, a midtown lobby with plants too glossy to be alive and a wall of security monitors showing the building's insides sliced into squares. The coffee kiosk sold $5 water to people for whom $5 was not a decision. Rachel wore the blazer from LinkedIn and addressed the color of concession. She hugged without touching anything above the shoulder blades and then stepped back and scanned Emily head to toe as if checking for weapons. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," Emily said, and meant it. Adulthood was often just scheduled avoidance. Putting an appointment in a calendar felt like a small revolution. Rachel's smile did not reach her eyes. "You put me in a difficult position," she said, like a manager to a junior staffer who had misfiled something. "No," Emily said softly. "You did that." Rachel's jaw tightened. "You think you can just pivot from scandal to savior? People see through that. They're not stupid." "I don't think people are stupid," Emily said. She felt calm in a way she hadn't expected. The room's air had a hotel quality to it. "And everything is fine, hum. I think they're tired. I think they want to belong to a side, and sometimes that matters more than the facts. And you want them on your side." Rachel tilted her head. "Isn't this all us another campaign? Look at yonder stated. Humble, a good cause, a new URL. You even have a name for it that sounds like something you'd get a grant for." "I do want a side," Emily said. "Just one. The one where people don't get destroyed for sport." Rachel laughed. One syllable snapped in half. "Spare me. You loved being the person everyone looked up to? You don't get to pretend now that you never liked the attention." The sentence landed like a pebble, small and sharp. Emily thought of the brochure photos, the scholarship gala where she'd had to speak into a microphone with donors' names scrolling behind her, the way she had built herself a story out of firsts. "Liking being seen isn't a crime," she said, almost tenderly, "but weaponizing it is." Rachel's gaze flicked to Emily's bag. Emily felt the audio file like a weight there, a small bomb that didn't tick. She could see the evening fork. On one path, she slid her phone across the table, hit play, watched the blood drain from a face she used to recognize, and then watched the internet do what it did best, devour and declare. On the other, she said the thing she'd come to say. "I have proof," Emily said. She watched Rachel's shoulders still. "I'm not here to use it, not yet. I'm here to give you a chance to tell the truth, to me, to the dean, to yourself, if you can manage that." Rachel recovered quickly, a pro at recovery. "This is extortion," she said, which was clever, because using legal words made the accusation sound official. "No," Emily said. "This is me choosing the kind of person I'd like to be and asking you to join me in being one. I am tired, Rachel. I am tired of being mad. I am tired of inventing new definitions of fair in a game that isn't. I am building something that requires me not to burn down rooms just to feel warm." Rachel's mouth pinched. For a moment, she looked younger, the version of her that had fallen asleep on Emily's couch sophomore year, mascara on a pillowcase, a joke half told in her throat. Then she looked like the headshot again. "You always did pick the angle that made you look good," she said, almost gently. "Maybe that's your real talent." "Maybe," Emily said. The lobby air conditioning sighed. A security guard yawed their jaw like a hinge. "But the thing about an angle is that it still points at something. This is me pointing." "At what?" Rachel asked, and if there was weariness there, it hid behind professional interest. "At an exit," Emily said, "for both of us." Rachel's phone lit. She glanced down, a micro-flinch betraying a message she didn't want witnessed. "I have to get back," she said, standing. "I'll think about what you said." "You'll think about how it plays," Emily said. Equally matter of fact, she stood too. "I can live with that." They did not hug. They stepped apart and became strangers who had never stood on a dorm balcony at 2 a.m. planning the ways they'd win. Outside, the evening pretending to be spring felt like generosity. Emily walked to the subway and took the stairs two at a time. On the train, a boy in a puffer jacket read a dog-eared paperback so intently, he didn't notice he'd missed his stop. Two nurses compared schedules and tried to make the algebra work. A couple argued softly about whether to buy real tickets or sneak into a movie. The city did its million-part ballet. At home, Emily wrote a dispatch about what it costs to keep your fire in a hearth when the wind is right there, free. She did not mention Rachel. She built the metaphor she could live inside. The house we are building will need repairs. We will learn how to use tools without calling them weapons. We will learn that anger is a hammer, and hammers are good at some things and terrible at others. We will let the porch light be the message. We're up. We're not burning. The moderation queue was full of smoke and of water. She let through letters that mended and rejected missives that demanded blood. Jason pinged her with a link to the podcast invitation on their site's homepage. Coming next week. Michael texted a list that read, simply, dogs in sweaters. Steam in winter. The M-train finding sky. The dean's assistant sent a polite reminder about documentation. Emily replied, I will meet with you. I have context to share. She looked at the audio file and moved it from her phone to a folder labeled for later. She did not delete it. She did not send it. She taped another scrap of paper to the wall, where not the court, where the bench. Then she pressed the corners down and stood back. The wall looked like a map. The room hummed. The city pretended to listen. She learned how to talk so that sometimes it would. The committee met in a room designed to make you feel small in a polite way. Framed prints of dignified buildings, a pitcher of water sweating onto a tray, 3 binders, each labeled with her name and a number, as if there were 3 of her and none entirely trusted. The faculty chair cleared his throat and reminded everyone that the process was educational, not punitive, which was what people said when they needed you to behave like a student while being treated like a case. Emily placed a manila folder on the table. Inside, her drafts, time-stamped, a timeline of the semester, a letter from a professor who would not put it on letterhead but did put his reputation in the body text, an annotated printout of the assignment prompt that showed how the class had arrived at the core idea together, out loud, in a room with 30 brains. She did not include the audio file. It was on a thumb drive in her pocket, its fact humming against her thigh like a second pulse. We're not retrying the project, she said. Steady. We're reviewing whether I'm a person who deserves to finish the work I did. She wanted that sentence to sound plain. It came out like a plea disguised as a thesis. One committee member and associate dean, with the tidy enthusiasm of a person who believed systems protected effort, asked whether she had any other documentation. Another asked whether she had considered issuing a clarifying statement for the community, the way a company might when a product malfunctioned. The chair repeated that they wanted to make decisions supported by evidence, like a mantra. The binders looked back at her as if they contained a person more legible than she was. I have something, she said. I'm not ready to submit it to the record. She let the silence sharpen the sentence. I am not trying to win. I am trying to be able to live with how I won. They nodded slowly, baffled by a refusal that didn't sound strategic. The chair thanked her for her professionalism. They would be in touch. The meeting lasted 30 minutes and a half, the half-minute being the time it took for her to gather papers and dignity into a shape that could exit. Outside, a student reporter waited with a microphone her hands had made to warm. Do you have a comment? She asked, hopeful in a way that made Emily ache. Not for print, Emily said, and meant it gently. The podcast studio sat on the 12th floor of an office building that hid its H behind new carpet. In the lobby, a framed poster asked guests to use their inside voices, which made her laugh in a way that calmed her. The host, a woman whose voice had once narrated 3 months of Emily's insomnia, shook her hand like they were beginning a project together. I like what you're building, the host said as she adjusted her headphones. We need rooms online, not mobs. Rooms with doors, Emily said, and chairs that fit. They recorded for 90 minutes. The microphones absorbed her stumbles as if they were allowed. They talked about moderation as an act of care, not censorship. About how rules written in human language could feel like invitations. About why Platform 9 didn't allow comments under stories. The host asked, knowing but asking anyway, why not name the person who hurt you? Because I am not the part of the world that names and punishes, Emily said. Because I'm trying not to confuse accountability with spectacle. Because if I turn my room into a stage, the first thing that burns is always the furniture. Some will hear that as softness, Thea host said. They won't be entirely wrong, Emily said. Softness can be an edge if you know where to press. The episode dropped on a Tuesday. The inbox did what the ocean does to a sandcastle. Tested it. There was love in it. There was derision in it. There was a long email from a social worker in Phoenix who had been waiting for a link to send to a teenager who would not leave her bed. There was a 2-line message from a guy who announced that he had screenshotted everything and would be letting sponsors know. The sponsors did not exist. Jason added a page called Resources with phone numbers and crisis lines and a note that said, "We won't be your therapist, but we will help you find one." Jason also built a backend that made moderation a little less like bailing a boat with a colander. He taught her shortcuts that felt like magic. 1 key to approve, to 2 hold, 3 to archive. He added a feature that let a person save a story as a draft and come back later. Grief is not a sprint, he said. Neither is telling the truth. Michael met her under the clock and listened to the podcast with her, the two of them sharing the same set of earbuds like teenagers. He nodded when the host said the word architecture. He said, Ava wanted to be an architect. Drew buildings that made no sense and all the sense. He smiled. She would have liked your porch. What happened after? Emily asked. After the storm for her. Did anything help? Nothing helped enough, he said. It was the cleanest grief. A lawsuit didn't bring quiet. A school assembly didn't bring contrition. People can win on paper and still lose the room they have to live in. Sometimes the only thing you get to choose is what kind of person you were while it was happening. He handed her a folded note, his list now leaving the boundary of his pockets. It read, a clean pair of socks. Someone who tells you a story with no moral at the end. The exact minute the M-train finds Sky. The anonymous sender of the audio file wrote back. I shouldn't have recorded it. The email began. It was adrenaline and disgust and a feeling like maybe telling a truth could keep me from floating off the planet. I'm a Ta. If I attach my name to this, I lose any chance at a career here. I can speak privately to the chair if that helps. Please don't make me public. Emily wrote back without delay. I won't make you anything. This is yours. Thank you for trusting me with what you had. She felt the moral calculus kink and unkink inside her. There was a version of this where she gathered testimony like kindling. There was another where she kept her hands open. Stories in the queue grew teeth and tenderness in equal measure. A 19-year-old wrote about being tagged in a rumor, a punchline, and how he couldn't make friends because he no longer believed anyone meant him well. A school secretary wrote about fielding angry calls from parents who had read a post on Facebook that traveled faster than any correction. A woman wrote about the year after a smear, the way the world got small and then, inexplicably, a little bigger again when she learned the names of the birds outside her window. Emily published that one under the title The Blue Jay Came Back. The university wrote to schedule a final review. Emily said yes and sent a statement that was not a defense. It documented the class process, attached the timeline, offered the quiet truths she could stand behind. At the bottom, she added a paragraph she had drafted and redrafted until the words felt like bones. I am asking for the right to complete my degree because I did the work that merits it. I am not asking you to decide who deserves to be shamed. If you need more evidence, I have it. If you choose to resolve this without demanding a sacrifice, I will be grateful. If you choose to keep this open, I will keep building the thing that makes it matter less who believes me. She sent it, then put her phone down and did not touch it for an hour. She washed dishes. She opened the window. She counted pigeons. She wrote a dispatch titled How to Hold Fire Without Burning Your Own Hands, which might have been a lie and might have been practice. The student paper published another think piece, this one more curious than condemning. What if we built better rooms? It quoted her line about benches and courts, and because this was still the internet pulled apart the metaphor in the comments until only splinters remained. A commenter who called themselves realist said, in the real world, People suffer consequences. Another, who signed their full name, wrote, consequences are not synonyms for mobs. The thread became an argument about words, which is what most arguments were when you stripped them down. A guidance counselor from her old high school emailed, "We're holding a workshop about digital citizenship. Would you speak?" The phrase digital citizenship annoyed her, but the invitation warming her inbox did not. She said yes and spent an evening picturing a gym full of restless students and the particular bravery it takes to admit you made a mistake in front of your friends and enemies both. She wrote an outline that did not include a single slogan. Rachel texted at 12:41 a.m., "I can't sleep. I'll tell the committee I exaggerated. I need to think about my job." She added, like a person performing honesty, "I didn't intend for it to go this far." Emily stared at the sentence. She thought of intention as the kind of rope you wrapped around yourself and called it a seatbelt. She typed and erased for replies and settled on, "Tell the truth you can live with. I'm not your audience." The next morning, the podcast episode was clipped by a bigger show and played in a feed that liked to be angry. The clips cut out the part about benches. They kept the part about not naming. The host, a man whose eyebrows did half the work, called her naive at best, complicit at worst. Emily turned the sound off. Jason texted, "You don't have to listen to every room you're not in." She texted back, "I know." Then she put her phone face down and went to the cafe and made foam into hearts for the people who wanted milk to speak to them. In the afternoon, a submission appeared from a student at her own university. The subject line read, "Please publish quickly." The body was a handful of short, panic sentences about a rumor that had exploded while the writer was in class, about screenshots with her face and someone else's story under it, about not wanting to go back to the dorm. Emily's chest tightened into a fist. She replied with three things at once. "You are not alone. Here are numbers to call right now. We can publish me what to include and what to protect." She wrote to the campus counseling center she used to with suspicion and wrote to a dean she did not trust and said, "A student is in distress," and used the word urgent, not once, but twice. Jason sat at his laptop and added a banner to the site. "If you are in immediate danger, click here." The link went to a page with resources that could survive being printed out and taped to a wall. That night, Emily listened to the audio file again. It had not lengthened, it had not weakened, it was still a fact. She walked in a square around her apartment, sink, window, wall, door, as if she could wear a path into the floor and find answers under it. She wrote to Emerson to the dean, one to the top. The dean said, "I am willing to provide additional documentation confidentially to the committee if necessary to resolve this matter quickly and with minimal harm." The TIS said, "Whatever you decide, I will not use your name without your permission. Thank you again." She did not email the PR firm that had withdrawn its offer. She did not email the student paper. She put the thumb drive in a small ceramic bowl and set it on the counter like a votive. Michael's list arrived by text at 9:03 p.m., someone saying "I'll wait" and meaning it. A chair left empty on purpose. The first night you don't dream about it. She lay down and repeated them like beads. The city pretended it was listening. On the other side of a wall, someone laughed at a sitcom joke with a little extra generosity. On her desk, the tape on the word platform curled. She pressed it flat in her mind and let sleep arrive like the train that always takes longer than you think and still comes. Forgiveness, when she pictured it, had always looked like a door you could close gently behind you. In practice it was a hinge you had to oil daily, a squeak you learned to live with. The student who had written "Please publish quickly" had a name now and a campus police report that used phrases like swatting and false alarm because someone had posted her dorm room number alongside a story that wasn't hers. Emily spent an hour on the phone with the counseling center and another with the dean of students who sounded sincere and weary, then hit publish on Maya's account with whole paragraphs blurred into white blocks where details would have endangered her. Underneath, she added an editor's note that read, "This is what protecting looks like." It doesn't look like the full story. We make room for people to survive telling it. The comments section, under stories, did not exist by design. The letters room, where response lived, swelled with notes addressed to Maya. Emily approved a dozen. I believe you. I'm on campus. Here is my number if you need someone to walk with. The language of care, clumsy and essential, flooded the inbox. The site's banner with crisis numbers caught the clicks it needed to catch. The committee scheduled what they called a final review for Thursday at 2. Emily ironed the one shirt she owned that could pass for businesslike and printed her documents again because paper felt like proof in ways PDFs sometimes didn't. The thumb drive lay in its ceramic bowl, as spare and alarming as a shard of glass on a kitchen floor. She tucked it into the side pocket of her bag and told herself she was allowed to have options. Rachel emailed at 9:07 that morning. I'm going to submit a statement acknowledging that I contributed to the misunderstanding. It will be carefully worded. I need to think about my job. Emily stared at the phrase contributed to the misunderstanding until it turned into fog. She typed, tell the truth you can live with, and did not add if it's small. At least let it be clear. The committee room was colder than last time, or maybe her shirt was thinner. The faculty chair thanked her for her emotional labor, a phrase that made something inside her want to laugh and cry in the same breath. They'd received a statement from another student. They'd reviewed her evidence. They had concluded that there was insufficient basis to withhold her degree. They suggested, in the interest of community healing, that she consider making a general statement about the importance of collaboration and respecting credit. They called their decision restorative and moved on to scheduling logistics. It took 5 minutes and a decade. You need anything else from me? She asked, because she'd learned to ask the question that made it harder for people to move past her like a puddle. No, the chair said, we appreciate your composure. In the hallway, the student reporter waited again, microphone a little steadier. Any comment this time? She asked. Emily could have said thank you or finally, or the thing about insufficient basis that would look good pulled as a quote. She said, we are building better rooms, and watched confusion and curiosity and relief cross the reporter's face in sequence. What does that mean? The student asked, poised for follow-up. It means, Emily said, that sometimes justice is what you build when you can't get the version with a gavel. On the subway, she stood in the spot where the doors would open to the stairs and felt the degree arrive and slot itself into her life with surprisingly little fanfare. She imagined rolling the news out like a banner, imagined 1,000 hands that had pointed at her now clapping. Then she imagined the counter-spectacle, the chorus of So She Was Lying. And guess it wasn't that serious, and what about Rachel? She exhaled. The city pretended to listen. She decided to speak to the people whose ears were already tilted toward her. At home, she opened the audio file because not opening it felt like superstition. Rachel's voice held its place in time. The vending machine coughed. The fluorescence hummed. She closed it and dragged it into a folder labeled Legal Things I Hope Not to Use, and then dragged the folder into another called Things Kept for Weather. She wrote a dispatch titled The Story, without names, and made a choice she knew would confuse some people. She did not say Rachel. She wrote about betrayal in the second person, about the way jealousy dresses itself up as analysis, about how crowds love an origin story that flatters their sense of having seen it coming. She wrote about her own complicity too, about the attention that had felt like sun until it blistered, about the way she had climbed the university's scaffolding and enjoyed the view. The piece was messy and she let it be. At the bottom, she added, I chose not to set a match on the person who lit mine. I am not asking you to agree with me. I am practicing the difference between justice and flame. I am using my hands to hold water and wood. I am keeping the bench dry. Letters split down a recognizable line. Thank you for modeling restraint, some said. You're enabling, others said, veiled as concern. A few accused her of inventing a villain she refused to name because it made her story more elegant. Some wanted blood, but were polite enough to call it accountability. Jason watched the moderation queue like a lifeguard. We can handle dissent, he said, but I'm closing the door to anyone bringing torches. The dean's office sent an official note she could forward to the registrar. The registrar sent a time slot for cap and gown pickup she would not use. The PR firm that had withdrawn wrote through a different address than last time, the subject line bland as a handshake. Opportunity. The body text said they were impressed by her initiative and would like to revisit conversation. She closed the email and looked out the window at the brick wall and thought, for a long minute, about the couch she'd once promised herself. She typed, "Thank you for reaching out. I'm focusing my energy on a project I started." She hit send, pictured an HR person arching an eyebrow and typing back anyway, and then did not check for a reply. Rachel texted, "I spoke to the committee. I didn't use the word lie. I said I interpreted. I'm sorry if that isn't good enough for you." Emily read it 3 times. The words were a compromise with a mirror. She typed, "You did what you can live with. I'll do the same." Then, because even boundaries could be generous, she added, "If you ever want to write about this without washing it, Platform 9 will publish it. It won't save you. It might help someone else." Rachel did not respond, which was its own integrity. Michael met her under the clock with a paper bag and a thermos and a look that could take a pulse at 20 feet. "You look like someone who got what she asked for and now has to carry it," he said. "The degree is back," she said. "It feels like a receipt." He grinned. "Receipts are proof you had a meal. You can't eat the paper, but it can keep you from thinking you imagined the food." She sat and told him about the folder labeled things kept for weather, and he barked a laugh. "Storm cellar," he said. "Smart." "Would it be weaker to delete it?" she asked. "Would it be braver to use it? I keep trying on different words for the same act and none of them fit." He poured coffee and passed her the lid. "Forgiveness ain't a stunt," he said. "It's not a post. It's lightening the pack so you can walk farther. You can forgive and still lock your door. You can forgive and still keep a map of where not to step. You can even forgive and say the name, if saying it is medicine and not fireworks. What if it's both?" She blew on the coffee as if it needed cooling. "What if the medicine needs a spark? Then you wait for rain," he said. "Or you build a fire break." She looked at his hands, at the way they'd learned to hold heat without flinching. "What did forgiveness look like for you?" she asked. He leaned back, the station announcements stacked behind his voice like a chorus. "Delays, arrivals, please stand clear." It looked like not checking the pages that were still saying her name wrong, he said. It looked like showing up here and not being mad at the bench. It looked like writing lists until the day came when I didn't need a list to remember what I liked. He passed her a new one. Neat capitals on scrap. "A train car where nobody is performing. A stranger who says take your time and means it. The quiet satisfaction of a drawer that closes without catching." She took a photo and texted it to herself, a breadcrumb trail back to the version of her that could make lists too. The high school gym smelled like rubber and cleaning fluid and nervousness. Emily stood behind a folding table with bottled water and a microphone and a projection screen she refused to use. The principal introduced her as an alumna who had navigated a complicated digital landscape, and the kids laughed at the phrase with a mercy she appreciated. She didn't tell them to be careful online. She told them about times she had wanted to be right more than she had wanted to be kind and the cost of that. She told them that one of the bravest things she had seen on her site was a person apologizing to a stranger without making them watch the apology. She told them about benches and courts and the difference between consequence and dogpile. When a student with a hoodie pulled low asked, "But don't some people deserve to be dragged?" she said, "Some people deserve to be stopped." Dragging and stopping aren't the same tool. She did not say Rachel. She said we and us until the room started to nod like a wind had found it. Afterward, a girl waited until the gym had emptied and said, "I said something mean about my friend in a group chat, and then it blew up and I don't know how to fix it without making it worse." Emily wanted to hand her a script. Instead she asked, "What would fixing it look like if no one had to watch?" The girl thought, then smiled, a little, like I already did it, she said. "But I haven't yet." "You can," Emily said, and meant it. That night, Emily wrote the editorial note that would sit at the top of Platform 9 for a long time. We will not be the place where you come to sharpen your knives. We will be the place where you put them down. We will not pretend forgiveness is owed. We will practice it as a way of letting the body rest. If you need a court, we are a bench outside it. If you need a room, we are up. Jason added a small icon to the footer, a bench drawn in 2 lines, a suggestion more than a picture. The tar wrote that the committee had spoken to her and that she had told them what she could without setting herself on fire. The dean's office sent the formal confirmation of degree conferral and an invitation to commencement Emily would not attend. The PR firm did not write back again, and she did not mind. The internet did what it would. A talk radio host called her a marshmallow with a thesaurus. A columnist wrote a piece called The Courage of the Unnamed. A Substack praised her moderation guidelines as humane infrastructure. Maya wrote that she'd walked to class with a friend today and no one seemed to be filming. Michael texted, "Sky was particularly sky today." She wrote back, "I saw it over the bridge too." She made tea and did not open the folder. She stood at the window and watched a pigeon hop sideways like a joke. She pressed the tape on the word platform, and this time it held without help. Forgiveness did not thrill. It was a competence, like making a bed. It didn't change the weather. It kept you warm while it happened. She went to sleep with the bench in her head and woke thinking about wood grain and how to sand without losing the shape. The city pretended it was listening. She kept talking in a tone that assumed it might learn. Growth didn't look like fireworks. It looked like a spreadsheet with more names than cells. A Slack channel named Triage. A shared doc titled House Rules 2.0 that collected edits in the margins from people Emily had never met and already trusted. Platform 9 crossed a threshold on a Wednesday. To ordinary, she wouldn't have remembered it, except Jason texted a graph with a line that climbed like a staircase and wrote, "We're past hobby." The inbox became a tide with a schedule of its own. Submissions arrived in the lull before dawn from nurses getting off shift, at lunch from students hiding in stairwells, at midnight from people who needed darkness to tell the truth. Emily learned to approve with one hand and breathe with the other. Jason built a moderation dashboard that felt less like a slot machine. He added color to the queue: red for immediate danger, blue for just need to be heard, gray for not yet. He added quiet hours to the site, a feature that nudged visitors after 20 minutes with a line at the top: "It's okay to rest. We'll be here when you come back." He added a footer link no one had asked for and everyone needed: how to help someone without making yourself their raft. A lawyer from a nonprofit emailed to say she could run a 1-hour clinic over Zoom. Anonymous questions welcome. A therapist from the Bronx wrote that she would volunteer to answer letters once a week. A librarian 3 states away offered a room with chairs and a projector if they ever wanted to gather. "We are your people," she wrote. "We know how to keep rooms quiet." Emily and Jason accepted a fiscal sponsor because neither of them wanted to Google payroll at 3 a.m. They wrote a mission statement that surprised them by being short. They started an account at a credit union because a bank felt like a conflict of metaphor. They did not add a donate button yet. When a foundation wrote to say, "We'd like to fund you if you can frame your work as fighting cancel culture," Emily said thank you and no. "We are a room," she wrote back, "not a cudgel." The site learned to breathe around storms. One Friday, a story from a teacher landed with a thud, a kind that ripples. She had been filmed after months of being baited, and the clip had traveled faster than correction. The usual places the internet went to eat found it. Jason watched the log spike. "Dates shut," he said, and toggled the setting that required requests from certain referrers to cool off. Emily published the story with an editor's note that read, "There will be no pylons here. If you want to write to this person, the room is letters. If you want to drag, the door is to your left." Letters filled with small, strong things. "I bring hot tea to my desk too. I kept showing up after I broke once. I am not a teacher and I think you are a human being." They added a page called Repairs. It listed legal clinics, grievance processes, union contacts, steps to take if someone had posted your address. The language was plain, the fonts held steady. The bench shone a tiny drawing Jason had sketched into linacet in the footer like a whisper. A graduate student in design wrote to say, "Thank you for the bench. My roommate and I printed it out and taped it above our router." Emily said no to a talk show that wanted a segment titled The Redemption Economy. She said yes to a library in Queens on a Saturday morning where 40 people sat in a circle while a children's story are echoed down the hall in a different key. She said yes to a community college in Newark on a Tuesday night where a janitor paused to listen and then folded up a chair when they were done. She said yes to a podcast hosted by a pastor in Omaha who asked about forgiveness like he'd had to practice it in rooms with fluorescent lights and family history. In the 9th week, the site took a punch. The DDoS wasn't sophisticated so much as relentless, an hour of junk requests aimed at turning the room into rubble. Jason's face took on the patient intensity of someone in an operating theater. "Breathe," he said. "Let me work." He spun up a shield, rerouted traffic, added a layer that made the bots wade through molasses. Emily went to the letters Q and moved with a rhythm that trusted her fingertips to catch the pieces that mattered. When the site emerged, whole, she felt more tired than triumphant. Growth meant learning to accept that some people liked to flip tables just to watch the room scramble. They added a note to the About page: "We will not narrate the attacks. We will publish the repairs." Michael came to the cafe on a Monday, hat off for once, hair flattened in a line where the brim usually sat. He took a seat by the window and watched people order kindness in paper cups. "I think I want to write about Ava," he said, not looking at Emily when he said it. Not as a lesson, as a map. He spoke in present tense when he was trying to be brave. Emily slid a napkin across the table and a pen and then took them back and replaced them with her small recorder. "Will you talk," she said, "and let me carry part of it?" They went to the bench under the clock and sat shoulder to shoulder, and he told a story that did not go in a straight line. It moved in circles, the way grief does when it respects itself. Ava at 10, announcing she would design houses made of glass and steel and trees. Ava at 13, learning the geometry of other people's meanness. Ava at 17, mistaking silence for safety, and then not finding her way back to sound. He didn't say the names of the people who had written the first lies. He said instead, "There's a bench in the park where we used to watch dogs that looked like commas. I still go there. I bring a book and don't read it. I let other people's breathing do the work." Emily edited that night with a light hand. She titled it A Map of Quiet and put it in read. Letters arrived like leaves. "Thank you," from fathers and daughters and people with no intention of having either. The next day, a woman wrote, "My son's name was Lucas. I will sit on a bench today and not tell anyone which one." In the comments that did not exist, silence held. In letters, people learned to talk to a stranger without building a pyre between them. Jason burned out on a Wednesday. He didn't announce it. He just arrived at the cafe with eyes to bright and a laugh that rang wrong. Emily asked, "When did you last eat?" He said, "Food will interrupt my panic." She walked him to a booth, put a sandwich in front of him, and texted to volunteers who had offered to learn the dashboard. "You're not a dam," she said. "You're a person." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I forgot to remember that." They instituted shifts. The word team began to feel real. A volunteer in Texas watched the queue from midnight to Eastern. A graduate student in Oregon took mornings. Emily took what was left and promised to leave some of it alone. They hired a therapist to run a monthly debrief for moderators who had been swimming in other people's storms and needed to remember what their own shore looked like. A law professor wrote a curt piece calling Platform 9 censorship in cardigans, arguing that moderation without names was a dodge. Emily wrote a response she didn't publish and then wrote a different one that she did. It said, "We are not the law. We are not even the lobby of the law. We are an anteroom where people decide whether they are strong enough to walk into the building. On good days, we point to the right door." The student newspaper did a profile, and the photographer asked Emily to stand by a window. The photo caught more brick than sky. The writer chose one of her sentences to carry as a headline, "We do not go viral, we go vital." The line made her wince and then made her nod. The email that arrived afterward from a mother in Tallahassee did the same. My daughter read that piece and said, "Maybe I'm not broken. Maybe I'm a person who needs a different kind of room. Thank you for building one." A donor showed up with a check and a string. They wanted a seat on a board that did not yet exist and a say in how stories would be chosen. Emily said no again, gently, and felt the muscle for it strengthen. Later, Jason said, "One day we will want a board. We will want money that lets us pay people to keep the lights on. But if we start by selling the wiring, we'll burn the house down the first time someone leans on a switch." They planned an in-person night because rooms built out of code still needed test runs in air. The New York Public Library said yes to a Thursday for an event that would be part reading, part listening, part whatever the room made it. Emily stood in the main reading room on a walk-through with a staffer who told her that the tables were oak and older than both of them and that people cried here sometimes. But quieter than in churches, the fanlight was a rectangle of late afternoon. The room smelled like paper and polish and the kind of time you only get in buildings that have refused to move. She touched the edge of a table and felt like she was asking permission. "We'll call it Letters Night," she said, and the librarian nodded like the name had been waiting for them. They chose 5 letters to read aloud, only from a nurse, 1 from a teenager, 1 from a father, 1 from a teacher, 1 from a person who just signed a human being. They invited no journalists and to anyone would come. They printed not programs, but slips of paper that read, "If you need to leave, you can. There will be chairs by the door and water in the hall." They put the bench icon in the corner and it looked like it belonged. On the way out, Emily stood alone for a minute in the aisle between tables and let the silence lift the day off her. The city, even muffled, hummed beyond the windows. She thought of all the rooms she hadn't been welcome in this year and felt a complicated gratitude for this one that had opened. She thought of the folder on her desk labeled "Things Kept for Weather" and understood that weather could mean thunder or a harvest. Back in her apartment, she taped a new line to the wall under platform, "We are a porch. We are a bench. We are a library after hours." Jason sent a text. "Night before is always the night that thinks it's the hardest." Michael replied in the group thread with a list, "A door that opens when you pull gently. A room where you're allowed to not clap. A light that knows when to dim." Emily smiled at the screen and then closed it. Outside, somewhere, a band practiced and missed the same chord twice before getting it. She lay down and rehearsed the first words she would say in the reading room if her voice cooperated. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for not needing names to feel like you belong here." The city pretended it was listening. For once, it might have been. The reading room held its breath the way old rooms do when people ask them to bear witness. Oak tables ran like riverbanks toward a painted sky. Green shaded lamps made pools of invitation. The librarians had dimmed the light until paper glowed and faces softened. 40 chairs stood in a loose crescent with aisles like escape routes. On each chair sat a white card with 3 lines. "You may leave at any time. Water is in the hall. You do not need to clap." Emily stood at the front with a lectern she didn't intend to lean on. Her hands weren't shaking until she noticed they weren't. "Thank you for coming," she said, and the room answered with the smallest sound she was adjusting. A cough, someone's sigh. Tonight has no names. It has voices and chairs and letters. There will be no comments under these stories. There will be a place for us to put our responses down and walk away. Jason sat 3 rows back, laptop closed, fingers resisting old habits. He'd routed traffic, set backups, told the site to breathe without him for an hour. Michael took an aisle seat, hat off, list in his pocket, a prayer on his face if you didn't insist on naming it. Maya sat between 2 friends near the back, hands tucked under her thighs, the way teenagers keep themselves from floating. A librarian, with a rectangle of light on her cheek, handed Emily the first envelope. The stationery was simple. The handwriting leaned right. "Dear whoever gets to hear this, I am a nurse. I held a hand that wasn't my mother's hand and watched lines flatten, and listened to a son shout my name into a phone because he needed a place to put the room. After he hung up, he put my name on the internet and said I killed his father. 10,000 people agreed with a click faster than my chart. I moved apartments. My wife stopped going to the grocery store. At work, I started wearing my badge on a lanyard tucked inside my shirt. 2 months ago, I wrote to a room with a bench instead of a gallows. A letter came back that said, I believe you, and I don't need a court transcript to know what your kitchen sounded like after. I printed that sentence and taped it inside the cabinet with the cereal. I am writing to thank the person who wrote it and to say I am still here. Yesterday, I bought tulips in January. Love, a person who keeps washing her hands. There was no applause. There was the sound of people remembering to inhale. Emily folded the page. Letters will live over there, she said, nodding to a long table laid with pens and a stack of cards and a small sign, write and leave it. Someone will carry it. She took the second envelope from the librarian and nodded to a volunteer who stepped up to read so that Emily's voice could rest. Dear us, you don't know me. Maybe you do. You saw a clip of me 50 times and you think that's me. It was me for 10 seconds. Before the 10 seconds, there were months. After the 10 seconds, there were screenshots. People reenacted me at lunch. I pretended to be a ghost in my own school so no one would have to do it for me. I wrote to Platform 9 because hiding is not the same as safety. A stranger left me a note that said, I can meet you at the library and we can walk out together. I did not go. I am thinking about going this Thursday. Maybe I will walk here. Maybe I will sit. Maybe I will write a letter to the person I have been since this started and say, you can put your shoulders down now. From a person who wants to graduate. Maya swallowed and looked at her shoes. The friend on her right slid a hand toward her palm and left it open. Across the aisle, a middle-aged man nodded like he recognized the geometry of being MIS seen. Jason passed Emily the third envelope as if handing a tool. This one was a father's handwriting, squared and careful. My son was named Lucas. He was very good at finding the last piece of a puzzle when everyone else had given up. He once told me, Dad, the internet is like yelling in a canyon and hearing your own voice come back wearing different shoes. I did not understand until his face was under an article and the article was under a pile of comments and none of them were wearing his shoes. I don't have a point except this. There is a bench in the park where dogs that look like commas run in circles. I sit there twice a week and I say his name out loud to the trees. I am writing in case you need permission to say a name out loud to a plant or a sink or a bench. You have it. Signed, a father learning the map. Michael didn't need to read that letter aloud to be in it, but the room felt his agreement. When it was his turn, he walked to the lectern and set a small piece of paper on the wood and did not look down. A map, he said. Voice a low river. Doesn't fix where you are. It keeps you from thinking you have to stay there. He told them about Ava the way he had told Emily. Circles, not lines. The bench, the dogs, the list that had grown legs. He said one sentence that hung in the room like a good chandelier. We mistaken walls for safety. A good door will do. He did not use the word forgive. He did not need to. The room had learned its shape. In the back, a journalist lifted a phone, thought better, and lowered it. The rules had been clear. No photos, no recordings. They had taken seats anyway, pens poised like instruments. Emily would not stop them from writing. She had invited them to listen. After the fourth lecture teacher, who wrote about starting over and discovering patience, a practice of the librarian brought Emily the last envelope of the first hour. The return address line held 3 words, a human being. Sometimes I think we love the idea of a villain because it lets us practice being a hero without changing our shoes. Sometimes I think we love the idea of a victim because it lets us practice being a savior without building a room. I don't know what I am. Today I cut an apple and ate it standing. I answered an email I had been afraid to open. I put my phone in a drawer while I cooked because the onions deserved my full attention. If you are reading this and waiting for instructions, here they are. drink water, unplug something, sit on a bench. If you can't find one, draw one, 2 lines will do. From a person learning to be small and okay. A woman in the second row put her face in her hands. The man beside her rested a palm on the back of her chair, not touching her, a setting without claim. Emily let the silence run a little longer than comfort and watched it turn into air. If you have letters, she said, the table's ready. If you need to leave, that's a full sentence. The first person to stand was a teenager in an oversized hoodie. She stepped to the letters table and wrote with her whole arm, not just her hand. A nurse followed. A janitor, who had been leaning on his broom in the doorway, the way men rest in old paintings, put his broom aside and wrote 3 words and folded them twice and slid them into the box. A woman near the back raised a hand half and then all the way. Emily nodded. What about accountability? The woman asked. What about the people who do harm and keep walking? If we only build benches, where do the doors go that lead to real consequence? It was not hostile. It was a question with a muscle. Emily was grateful for it. This room does not replace courts, she said. We made a page called Repairs for Doors. We point there. We have unions and grievance processes and lawyers and ombuds. We are not that. We are this. But sometimes this feels like not enough, the woman said, softer. It will always feel like not enough when what you want is time and apologies and a changed culture by next Tuesday, Emily said, and the room exhaled a laugh that recognized itself. We do not settle for benches, we start on them. Jason's phone buzzed in his pocket. He slipped out the side door and looked down at a screen full of junk traffic trying to introduce itself as a crowd. He toggled a switch in his head from listen to defend, and then another on his laptop from open to narrowed. A botnet pinged the site 16,000 times in a minute and was asked, politely and firmly, to tie its shoes. He breathed, texted Emily a checkmark, and came back in as quietly as he had left. Maya stood and moved toward the letters table like she was remembering how to walk. At the edge, she stopped and turned back. Can I say something out loud? She asked. She didn't need a mic. She had a voice that knew how to cross a gym without strain. Emily nodded. Only if you want to? I wasn't brave yesterday, Maya said, eyes on the table, then up. I might not be brave tomorrow. But I'm here today. She slid a folded page into the box. And that counts. It counted. The room let it. After the last letter, Emily thanked the librarians by name and the room with a bow of her head. People stood slowly, like animals who had been startled before and were testing the air. They moved to the table and to the exits, left envelopes, and took a breath and went into the night with something in their pockets that wasn't a phone. A journalist approached, pen cap between teeth. A quote, she asked, reflects trumping ritual. On what tonight was, Emily thought and then said, a practice, and the journalist wrote the word as if it had more letters than usual. Jason stood at the back with his hands on his laptop like a surgeon, feeling the heartbeat after. Held, he said, as if reporting from the other side. We held. Michael handed Emily a folded list. It read, a room where nobody is auditioning. A sentence that ends and nobody needs to fix it. The exact sound a chair makes when you decide to leave and everyone understands. The librarian pressed an envelope into Emily's hand as people drifted out. Someone dropped this at the desk, she said. No return address. Inside, a single page. The handwriting was neat and familiar in a way that made the skin on Emily's forearms prickle. I came and sat in the back and didn't speak because I wouldn't have known how. I am not ready to be the person you asked me to be. I am trying to be the person I can live with. Tonight did not absolve me. It did not indict me. It made it harder for me to pretend I don't know the difference. Emily folded the page once and then again and felt every version of what she might feel tried to stand at once. Anger, relief, contempt, a small tenderness like a pilot light. She put the letter in her pocket without deciding what any of it meant. On the steps outside, the city waited with its usual hum. Fifth Avenue moved its cars in orderly pulses. Steam breathed up from a grate as if the building were telling secrets to the night. People spilled onto the sidewalk, speaking quieter than they had when they entered, as if the room had loaned them its tone. Maya and her friends passed, laughing at nothing, shoulders knocking with comfort. The nurse walked with her wife, the tulips of her letter suddenly plausible even in January air. The janitor lit a cigarette and did not smoke it. He held it like an old habit he was considering breaking. Jason bumped her shoulder with his. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," she said. "And after." Michael stood a step down, hat back on, the brim pulling him into shadow like a ceremony. "Good room," he said. "You built it so the quiet could do some of the work." "The room built us," she said, surprising herself with how right it was. They walked to the corner where the lion statues kept their stone watch. A bus roared, a siren threaded. Someone shouted and someone answered without anger. Emily looked up and saw the sky refuse to be erased by the city's bright insistence. She held the envelope in her pocket and the bench icon in her mind, and the sound of a chair being pushed back as a kind of music. The city pretended it was listening. For once, the pretense was close enough to pass. She took the subway home and stood in the spot where the doors would open, felt the train find the bridge and the air change and the water appear like a revelation you had to earn. When the car rose to meet the sky, 3 people looked up at one seethed girl with a hoodie, a man in a suit, a mother with a sleeping child. For a long breath, they were all witnesses to something not for sale. The city hummed, the bench held, and Platform 9 stayed lit in a room with no wires anyone could cut. A year did not arrive with trumpets. It arrived like a jacket you'd forgotten you owned and reached for without thinking the first cool morning. Platform 9 was a room now with doors and a calendar and a lease on a second-hand office with windows that faced, blessedly, a tree. The bench icon sat at the footer of a site that still refused to shout. The inbox learned a new rhythm, not fewer storms, but people who had learned how to come in out of them sooner. Emily kept the degree in a drawer. The registrar had offered a cap and a date and a row. She'd said no thank you. It wasn't bitterness. It was a sense that ceremonies belonged to moments and that one had passed. On some afternoons, she took the paper out and laid it on the table and let it be what it was, proof that she had done a thing even when a room full of binders hadn't agreed yet. Then she'd slide it back and answer 3 letters and a grant application. They did take money. Eventually, not from the people who wanted a cudgel, not from those who wanted a seat on a board that didn't exist. A librarian in Ohio had set up a fundraiser that trickled more than it poured $20 from a nurse, 5 from a barista, 100 from a retired shop teacher who wrote in the memo line, for chairs. A foundation called itself Small and meant it, wrote a check without a pitch deck attached, and said, "Keep the lights on and pay the people to keep the lights on." They did. Moderators got stipends. A therapist billed them for less than she should, and Emily told her to stop doing that. A student named Dev learned Jason's dashboard and then rewrote half of it, and Jason was as proud as if he'd been replaced. The site's repairs page grew into a lattice. It linked to hotlines and ombuds and grievance processes and sample letters that could be printed and handed to a principal or a boss or a landlord when your mouth forgot how to make requests. A tab called How to Leave a Room quietly rose in the analytics. It listed steps for turning off notifications without turning off your life, for unfollowing without ceremony, for refusing to be summoned by the worst parts of a day. A high school counselor in Fresno emailed, "I printed that page and put it on my door. Kids take photos like it's a recipe." The night at the library became a template other rooms borrowed. Letters night happened in a basement in Omaha where a church had folding chairs that squeaked in a key that made people laugh. It happened in a community center in Tallahassee where the AC unit rattled on the roof like weather. It happened in a school auditorium where the custodian had left the stage lights low because bright lights made less happen. Emily said yes when she could and sent a box when she couldn't. A sign that said you do not need to clap. A stack of cards. A drawing of a bench. Maya came by the office one afternoon in a hoodie that said class of in block letters and then nothing, like a joke she'd been allowed to finish. She brought donuts that looked like good intentions, sat on the floor because the chairs were at the table occupied by laptops and tension, and said, "I declared a major and it's not fear." She laughed at her own line and added, "Sociology." Actually, she asked if she could volunteer. Emily said yes and meant it like a vote. The PR firm sent another email, warmer and somehow less. Emily did not answer. It turned out there were more interesting ways to spend a morning than being welcomed into a room that had once shut its door. A radio producer she admired asked if she would consult on a series about digital harm that promised more listening than indicting. She said yes if she could veto the music they used under people's voices. They gave her that small power. She used it. Rachel didn't vanish. She didn't call. She did something harder to narrate. She sent checks, irregularly, from a donor-advised fund with a name bland as a door. Once she sent an envelope with no return address and a single sentence, "I am building my own bench." It wasn't absolution. It wasn't a confession. It was at least a verb. Emily put the note in the folder labeled Things Kept for Weather and tried not to assign it more weight than it could bear. Forgiveness had not turned the world into a kinder place. It had turned her into someone who slept. Michael's lists became a column on the site. Once a month, small and stubborn as moss. People wrote to say they printed them and kept them in kitchen drawers beside rubber bands and take-out menus. He remained at the station and on the bench and in her life in the way reliable things are, not every day, not with fanfare, and there when the ground felt less interested in holding still. He spoke at one letters night, then two, then decided that was enough of microphones. "My voice sounds better in the air, without a wire," he said, and she didn't argue. Jason learned to take days off. He said it like a thing he didn't trust, and then did it anyway. He started dating a person who could tell when to close his laptop by the set of his shoulders. He taught to volunteers to deploy the site on their own. He wrote an essay about infrastructure and used the word tenderness 3 times and didn't apologize. A state legislator's office asked Emily to testify at a hearing on online harms. The phrase made her teeth itch, but she knew that some rooms you entered not because you liked them, but because people had built policies in them that would outlast your annoyance. She wrote remarks on a legal pad and then on a laptop and then not at all for an hour while she stared at a crack in the office paint that looked like a river. In the hearing, she spoke about rooms and benches and the difference between consequence and mob. She said the words moderation and care in the same sentence and watched a man in a navy suit frown like she'd misfiled something. She stayed anyway. Afterward, a staffer in sneakers caught her in the hall and whispered, "Thank you for saying the quiet part without making me feel like I should whisper." The internet did not crown Platform 9. It poked and prodded and sometimes tried to set it on fire. A columnist with the talent for contempt wrote that the site was a halfway house for the reputationally fragile. A mother in Boise wrote, in the same week, that her son had gone back to school after 5 months at home and had said at breakfast, "I think I can try again." Emily read both in the same hour. She ate an apple standing and answered one email and did not read the column a second time. The office developed its own sounds, the whir of a cheap fan that kept working, the clunk of the mail slot when someone pushed a letter through, the click of the bench icon keychain hitting the glass jar where people dropped coins by habit because giving something small at a counter soothed them. The tree outside had a bird she hadn't learned the name of and a habit of landing like punctuation on the sill. On a Tuesday afternoon that had spent itself quietly, she Googled her name and did not flinch. The results were not clean. They were complicated in a way she recognized. A profile called her work humane infrastructure. A thread called it PR for remorse. A link to the student papers, What If We Built Better Rooms, set to lines below the op-ed. That had once made her hands shake. The order seemed almost irrelevant. She clicked on a letter from months back, the one signed a human being that had instructed somebody on herself to drink water and unplug something and sit on a bench if you couldn't find one. Draw one. To lines had done, they did again. She went back to Times Square on a night that pretended it was summer. The red stairs were slick with the sigh of tourists. The lead sky barked its usual commands. The saxophonist played different bars. Still stubborn, still a voice under the choir of advertising dollars. She sat 2 steps up from where she'd accepted coffee from a man in a Marine Corps hat and realized she was waiting for something that wouldn't repeat itself because it didn't need to. A girl not much younger than Maya creed into her sleeve 2 seats away while a friend's hand hovered above her shoulder like a thought. Emily slid down the stair and set a napkin beside them with a note written on it in pen from the bottom of her bag. Betweenstops.org. No comments. Letters only. The friend read it, nodded once, tucked it in a pocket like a receipt. Michael appeared with the timing of weather, not story. You always did like to come back to the scene, he said, settling into a familiar slouch. It's where the city taught me I was small and not non-existent, she said. He passed her the thermos lid. Coffee tasted like its old self. List? He asked, and she realized she had one in her head without having written it. A door that opens when you pull gently, she said. A room where you're allowed to not clap. A light that knows when to dim. He smiled. I wrote those. You did, she said. I stole them. Borrowed, he corrected, returned with interest. They sat while a preacher promised and a billboard insisted and a costumed character took photos with 6 smiles per minute. The city did its work. It pretended, as always, to be listening. Emily closed her eyes and heard something else, her own voice, not loud, not new, and not alone. She thought of the bench icon in the footer, of the oak tables and the letters folded twice, of the teenager who had said, I might not be brave tomorrow, and then had been anyway 2 days later. She thought of Rachel's envelope and of the ones without return addresses that had done more good. When she stood, it wasn't to declare or to finish, it was to catch a train. She walked toward the turnstiles and touched the fingers to her pulse out of habit. Present, present, present. On the platform, a boy practiced an ollie with a skateboard and failed and laughed and tried again. A woman in scrubs leaned her head back and let the tiles cool her neck. A man in a suit loosened his tie and hummed to himself without noticing he was doing it. The train arrived and took them like a promise. It rose over the bridge and the water appeared like the same revelation it had been the first 1,000 times. The city could be loud and still make room for a sky. At the office the next morning, someone had slipped an envelope under the door. Inside was a check for $50 and a note on lined paper. I can't fix the internet. I can bring a chair. Emily pinned the note to the board beside the rules and the scraps. She touched the tape and it held. Jason arrived with coffee and a grin. Dev sent a message, uptime 99.999%, and then, more human, plus sight is nice. Michael texted, Sky, particularly Sky. Maya sent a photo of the library steps with a caption, Thursdays still count. Emily sat down, opened the inbox, and let the work be what it had always been, not saving the world, not even saving a day, but building a room sturdy enough that people could save themselves in it. The city pretended it was listening. She kept speaking in a tone that assumed it could learn. And when it didn't, Platform 9 stayed lit anyway, a porch light that said the same thing every night and meant it. We're up.